welcome back to the caves, everybody. Welcome back to Deep Rock Galactic, where today we're going to be going over 5 of the best builds for Ingie's LOK rifle, or LOK-1 rifle, however you'd like to say it. So the LOK rifle has always been a pretty solid weapon for Ingie. It's really nice that you don't really need to aim this too much, even more so with some of its overclocks. It is cool that you can curve the bullets into enemies, but it does run through ammo fairly quickly. That's the major problem with the LOK. So let's hop right into it with our very first build. This is going to be running the explosive chemical rounds, which is an incredibly powerful overclock for the LOK. It's probably its strongest overclock and really has been for quite a while. And the way this one works is once you put 3 locks onto an enemy and fire a shot, if that shot would either kill the enemy, or if all 3 shots go off onto that single enemy, then the third shot, or last shot, whatever the case might be, then that explodes, and this deals damage to everything around it. It can also break armor, and it can also fear enemies. This is really, really strong. This makes it so all you want to do with the LOK is 3-round bursts. You want to put 3 locks on something, let it go, cause the explosion. It's great for crowd control, it's great for single target damage, it's good for both. You can target something big and deal damage to everything around it. The way I have my LOK built is just pretty much everything on the left hand side besides the ammo. You don't need extra damage on this one because a lot of your damage is coming from the explosion, so more ammo makes sense, but everything else on the left hand side makes it so that you got a more precise targeting with the tier 2, which is really, really useful. It gives you longer range, as well as it makes it so you can single out enemies, which is what you want to do with this. You don't want it to be trying to lock onto absolutely everything. And then we also have the electricity generator in tier 5, as well as the extra damage from fire or electricity in tier 3, so we can do even more damage. With this alone, you can actually just kill like Trijaws with just a 3-round burst, even on the highest difficulty. This does take a second for the electricity to tick down and kill them, but so long as you do that before they can actually spit, and even if you can't, the explosion usually stuns them anyway, you'll still clear them up. This LOK is really, really strong against basically everything. It also pairs really well with anything. I decided to pair mine with Inferno Breach Cutter. This one is really strong. The Breach Cutter is already really powerful. Putting fire on it just makes it that much more powerful, since then if you don't just outright kill something, it's at least on fire and taking damage over time. This also pairs really well with explosive chemical rounds, since we have the electricity generator and the extra electricity and fire damage at tier 3, which do stack. So if something's being electrocuted and on fire, we're getting even more damage on top of that. The way I have my breach cutter built is my normal breach cutter, so I'm just running extra ammo on this. You could run extra damage if you would like. The breach cutter with Inferno can kind of be built however you enjoy it, but I enjoy this build the most. And then I'm going to be using the breach cutter at close range and against big targets, so Praetorians, oppressors, anything like that. Hit them with the breach cutter and then use the explosive chemical rounds, and then I'm going to be using the LOK for anything that's kind of longer range. Then on top of that, I have my turrets and usually my shredder drones too. So this build is probably one of Ingie's strongest. It's really good for just about everything. The only time where it might be a little bit weak is if you wanted to go on a Dreadnought mission, where Inferno is not going to get you the most amount of damage, in which case you could swap this off for like lightweight cases on the breach cutter and basically have the same weapon but a little bit more DPS against the dreads. And even if you want to take this on a Dreadnought mission, it should work just fine. For our second build, we're going to be running Executioner LOK. This one is another really strong overclock and a pretty ammo efficient one for the LOK. So this one will get you more damage whenever you hit a weak spot on enemies. However, you get less targets, which actually isn't that big of a deal for the LOK, and you get less overall ammo, but not by very much. This one I have built pretty much all for damage, and just kind of the way that I usually build my standard LOK. So nothing way crazy here. This one deals a lot of damage and a lot of damage per second, really no matter what you're hitting, so long as you're hitting weak spots. This one's really straightforward, but it's really strong. For a secondary, since we have a lot of single target damage, I decided to take one with crowd control. For this, I'm running the Shard Diffractor, and we're running the Volatile Impact Mixture. This is the Magma Laser. This one is really good currently. It doesn't come with that much of a downside, and the major upside that you get is that you can use the Shard Diffractor the way you normally would. If you want even more single target damage, you can absolutely do that, or you can drag it across the floor and put sticky flames everywhere. And that's pretty strong because it lights enemies on fire quickly, so it's fantastic for the crowd control. Couple it with your turrets and with like your shredder drones or lures or whatever you're trying to use. Proxy mines also work really well, and you shouldn't have a problem with crowds. Then you can just use the Executioner for clearing up everything else. The Shard Diffractor I have built pretty much the same way I usually build my Shard Diffractor. I just have more of an emphasis on fire here, just so if I am trying to single out something, I can light it on fire. But if you wanted to go with more single target damage, you could do that. The only thing I'd really recommend that you take with this particular overclock is taking more ammo with the shard diffractor just so that you can get more value out of the magma. Moving on to our third build, we have our newest overclock. This is the smart targeting system. This one makes it so once you're locked onto an enemy, fully locked on, which in this case is only 2 lock-ons or 4 lock-ons if you take the tier 4, then your gun will just fire by itself. This makes it so that Loki has a pretty fast rate of fire and it has good consistent damage towards basically everything. The only downside with this one is that it's not necessarily the best on missions where you get like Swarmageddon. And if you get Nanosite Breeders where you're getting a lot of jellyfish, you might run through ammo a little bit quicker because the Loki can just lock on and then fire out all the shots, and you only need 1 shot to kill any of those enemies. So firing out 2 or up to 4 shots does make it so you can run through ammo potentially quick, but so long as you're not fighting them super consistently and you're fighting grunts and maybe Mactera and whatnot, this one is actually very solid. It's also just really easy on the hands rather than having to constantly hold, let go, hold, let go, hold, let go, which I know some people might have hand or wrist issues. This one you don't need to do that. You can just hold down the trigger and that's it. That's all you need to do. And it will just fire for you, and it's pretty strong. You can still try to curve the bullets into enemies, but it does go pretty fast, so you kind of have to do it quickly. And it's much easier against certain enemies like grunts, which, you know, their weak spot is their head. This one does pretty good damage. It does good damage per second. This one feels very similar to like Scout's GK2 assault rifle, other than you don't need to aim it. It just kind of aims itself. So this one is a pretty simple overclock, but it's a really cool overclock that we got this season. I decided to pair this with Lightweight Case's Breach Cutter. This one is just really solid. It's one of my favorite overclocks for the Breach Cutter. Gives you more ammo, and then I just stack it for more ammo. You could stack it for damage or really anything that you would like, and it will work just fine. Moving on to our fourth build, we have Seeker Rounds. Seeker Rounds is a balanced overclock that makes it so you can shoot through basically anything once you have a lock on, because the bullets kind of teleport towards the enemy, which also makes it really, really difficult for this one to get any sort of friendly fire damage on it, which is pretty cool. It also makes it so it can just bypass any sort of armor. You don't need to worry about like Dreadnought's armor. You can just aim directly at them, hold down the trigger, and wait for all the locks to go on here and then let it go. The downside to this one, though, is that you do have a slower rate of fire, and that is noticeable, and it's not necessarily as good against crowds. The way I have this one built is just for all damage. We're always going to be getting consistent value out of this one, regardless of how we use it, because it's just it's a really good overclock, and it makes it so it ignores armor, which is fantastic. This can work really well against basically everything. It's also very nice for certain large enemies that might be a problem, like menaces or spitballers, where you can lock onto them, walk around the corner, and then fire this, and you don't have to worry about really anything. Your bullets are going to hit that enemy, which is fantastic. The electricity on this is pretty nice for dealing extra damage. You can run blow-through rounds on this, and that's also kind of fun because blow-through does work for this, but it has to work after you hit an enemy and then it goes through them. So trying to like curve your bullets into an enemy and then around into another one can be super fun. Although I know not a lot of people like taking that. The electricity is pretty consistent, and that's what I would probably recommend. For a secondary weapon, since we kind of have our single target and our long range covered, something for close range and crowd control is probably what we need, so I decided to take RJ250 with the grenade launcher. This one is pretty good. You get a lot of shots for the grenade launcher. If you build fire for it, it still clears up crowds of grunts really easily. It can clear up things like swarmers and potentially jellyfish to some extent. They're a little bit more difficult to hit with this. And on top of that, it gives you another mobility option where you can use this to jump up in the air and launch yourself. It can be really good for getting to safe places, or for just if grunts are moving too close to you, you can only shoot it, jump back, then swap back to your Seeker rounds to keep shooting them. And then for our fifth and final build, we're going with our other kind of new overclock, which is Neuro Lasso. So Neuro Lasso was an unstable overclock that's now been changed to a balanced overclock, and it is a whole lot better than it used to be. What Neuro Lasso does is whenever you lock onto an enemy, this will slow that enemy down, and it lingers for a little bit longer now too, which is awesome. It doesn't really have much of a downside anymore, so this one is really good for a team. It's going to be less useful in a solo setting. It can still kind of work because Bosco can be shooting stuff too, or if you have a Steve, or if you're using your turrets pretty effectively, then all of those can still get value from it, but this is going to be the most effective in a team setting. The way I have this built is just for more ammo. That's going to be the main thing that I recommend. Aside from that, you can kind of pick whatever you'd like. I just ran it like my normal Loki, but if you want to run electricity on this, that can also be pretty good. You can't keep holding this onto an enemy. After a little while, the locks will decay, but if the locks decay, then you don't actually have to fire the Loki. You can just keep resetting it. So it does potentially have infinite value towards everything, and the more locks you put on a single target, the slower it goes. This one is pretty cool, and it's very good in like a dreadnought setting, because slowing the dreadnoughts down and allowing teammates to run around them can be pretty useful. I don't know if this would be my go-to for a dreadnought mission, but it works on those ones. It works pretty much on everyone. The main reason why I say I wouldn't is because we've already went over like Executioner and Seeker rounds, which I think are kind of better. Since we kind of have our crowd control covered thanks to Neuro Lasso, I decided to take something with a lot of single target damage as our secondary, and I took Hyper Propellant with the grenade launcher. This one is really strong. It makes it so you can hit really, really hard with the grenade launcher, does a lot of damage. You can still build fire on this, although fire has been tweaked to where it's working correctly on this one, because it used to just give you flat damage bonus. You just got fire on top of your shot with Hyper Propellant since it changed the damage type. Now it does actually nerf your damage, but it's still really good if you want to take it on like robot missions, because you can still one-shot any of the robots with this. Besides like Nemesis. And even if you didn't want to take that, Hyper Propellant is still fantastic for taking out any sort of big threats. Basically, I'm going to be using Neuro Lasso to fight the majority of enemies, and then when anything big shows up, Oppressor, Praetorian, Menace, whatever it might be, use Hyper Propellant to just snipe them off. This one works pretty well, especially if you can set your turrets up ahead of time, because this one can lack a little bit in the overall crowd control, but if you've already set up your turrets in an area, you should be good to go. And that'll do it for 5 of the best Loki builds, at least in my opinion. The other 2 clean overclocks are good too, that should be said. Eraser is nice because it just gets you more ammo overall and more targets, which is fine if you like using the Loki that way. An armor breaking module can be good because armor breaking is pretty much always good on most weapons. Tell me your thoughts on the Loki builds, which ones are your favorite, and which are your favorite overclocks? Have you gotten to try like the new Neuro Lasso too? How do you enjoy that? Thank you guys so very much for watching this video. Hope that you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye bye everybody!